Hello everybody, welcome back to episode 11 of the Dead Pixel podcast. As ever, I'm one of your hosts, Mr. Brown, and joining me this evening we've got Mr. Orange. Good evening, Mr. Orange.
Good evening, nice to be here.
And as ever, the legend, Mr. White. How are you this evening?
Good afternoon, evening, Monday. Won't tell you what it is, but yes, guys, nice to be here, and yet again.
Cloaked in mystery, I like it. Okay, guys, well, the round table for tonight is about austerity. I was thinking about the next topic. It's really on the back of, I would say, the match last October, 50,000 strong, headed by Russell Brand, who's becoming a bit of a powerhouse on the left, just out of the blue. That was the match against austerity. And also, just recently, nurses striking on the NHS at a 1% pay rise. Now, this was a pay rise, if people don't know, that was recommended by an independent body for the last few years and was promised, but my understanding is that that's now been cancelled, and the reason for cancelling it, as George Osborne said, really sorry, we can't afford it now, we're in austerity, in the age of austerity. So that's it in a nutshell. So I thought on the back of that, let's just do a topic about austerity in general. I mean, here we are in the UK, the Tories have come in. It's all about austerity, or it seems to be all about austerity, cutting your cloth accordingly, paying off your debts. All seems to be very noble things on the surface. So guys, austerity. Now, we're in a situation here, guys, where realistically we're either going to get, in a very, very narrow paradigm, Labour and Conservatives. We're stuck with Conservatives at the moment, they're all about austerity. But we've also got Labour. Now, a lot of people say, what's the difference between Labour and the Conservatives? Well, I don't know really, but Labour's more about, they say stuff like economic stimulus, getting people into work rather than cutting back. But they seem to be taking on a lot of the austerity measures of the Conservatives just on the quiet. And I'd be interested to see how far they would go if they did get in power. But Mr. Orange, you live in an age of austerity. How are you coping, mate? How's it affected you these last few years? Or what's kind of the rhetoric that you've picked up on?
Okay, well, affect me personally, it's a lot less money in my pocket and a lot less I can spend out. Rhetoric-wise, I've not noticed much difference between Conservative and Labour, apart from Labour saying that they would do it a lot more softly. In terms of actual action from Labour, they didn't really oppose many of the cuts, if any, just bandwagoned on, some of the marches and some of the protests.
Okay. So with regards to austerity, really, we didn't really think about or hear about this in this country until the banking crisis, really. Mr. White, austerity since the banking crisis, yeah, good thing, bad thing? What would you do in that situation? Would you be more willing to rely on the economy to stimulate jobs, or do you think cutting back and whatnot is the best policy?
I'm not an expert in the banking, how the funds, what works, how they are commonly being driven. But as far as I understand, obviously, austerity should be imposed, but not for those people. I think austerity should be imposed on the richer people, because obviously their income should be the one that actually rise the economy back on, because the normal people obviously, for example, when you're spending money and you don't have enough, you still got time, a few weeks till the next salary, and you know that you need to stretch out. What you do, you either plan out and spend less, or you take credit, right? So this is two things you would do as a normal person. And obviously, that's one of the things that the government trying to do. But the thing is, I don't understand how it should be taken off of the NHS, because obviously, me personally experienced lots of worsened situation about the services I received from NHS personally, and you can feel, the time it takes. For example, every time something happens, it takes at least 4 hours to get to the doctor, which is a ridiculous amount of time just to wait for one. And obviously, this is because of the short of staff, and this is because they don't want to pay, and they're cutting billions of pounds on it. But I think the person who needs to get involved, the people are, a big major bankers and cooperative leaders who get paid millions of pounds a year, should get imposed. Obviously, not many of those. That's my personal opinion. Okay. And obviously, one of the things, a coin by coin, you stretch to a pound, right? So yeah, austerity measures also necessary. But obviously, it's just because of the stupid politics that we had
Yeah.
before the crisis.
Well, I mean, you mentioned the NHS there. Suppose the NHS is easy pickings because it's one of our biggest external outputs that we don't necessarily make any money off, obviously.
Yeah, but we're paying for this.
We
from
do. Well, obviously,
weekly,
it
right?
comes out of our taxes and national insurance and stuff like that. One interesting thing that I discovered recently is that the idea of a nation's growth is quite a fairly new concept. You know, this idea of a nation actually making money, sort of, and as a real concept. If you make money, that's great, but as a real concept, a drive and a purpose, is only a concept from the 1950s. Before that, it was all about balance. It was all about just try and make your outgoings and your incomings about the same, you know, type thing. But now it seems to be this obsessive drive of GDP. Every year you've got to have some growth, and if you don't get that growth, you know, it's really looked down upon in the international arena. You know, they only made 0.5% growth this year, and you know, and you get China and stuff that have made 9% in the past, and it's just like, wow, they're so fantastic. The thing for me about debt, I don't know if you guys know this, one strange concept about it is there is vastly, vastly, vastly more debt in the world than is actually tangible wealth. So, you know, this idea of paying off your debts is a very noble idea. We're all brought up with it in this society, and it's, if you lend somebody something before you do anything else, make sure that when you get paid, you know, you make sure that Mr. White gets his £10 back before I go out, you know, and have a drink or whatever. And it's just sort of like very noble concept that we're all brought up with. But it's ridiculous on the global stage. Mr. Orange?
I think that's basically down to interest, isn't it? I think
Partly, yeah.
you've got to say there's more people in debt than there's more people in credit, and interest rates are the same both ways.
Interest rates is a massive part of it, but there's a lot of very sophisticated hokey-pokey when it comes to the financial sector on a global level, and interest is one of them. I'll just run off a few things. You know, how do nations get in debt? The UK is in debt. You know, America is the richest, most powerful country that's ever existed in the history of humanity, and it's trillions of dollars in debt. Okay, so how can that be? So basically, the way that nations get in debt, the most traditional one is printing money. Yeah, if you've not got it, you print it. That's the first thing. Yeah, so that creates inflation. So you've got this sort of inflation stagnates the economy. Yeah, things are not valued as much as they once were. Yeah, you've got interest payments, as Mr. Orange has already just mentioned there. You've got, I mean, they're not in any order, but I'll just let you know. You've got war reparations, which is what we've just paid off. I think in 2006 we finally paid off our loans to the US for World War I and World War II. You've got international financial commitments. This one's an interesting one. So in the EU, things like NATO. So NATO for the UK, whenever you sign up to NATO, what you do is you're contractually obligated to give them 2% of your GDP, which for the UK is about £35 billion a year. That's to be a part of NATO. Yeah, that's debt. Okay, you've got things like in the UK, we put £50 billion aside every year in case of, believe it or not, banks collapsing. Right, these are things that are sort of accumulated within the whole infrastructure of a nation. Yeah, the biggest one, believe it or not, is actually selling your debts. So if you're in debt, what you do is, as a nation, when we talk about this sort of jiggery pokery that they do, it's a case of say I'm in debt by £100. Yeah, and I go to Mr. Orange and say, do you want to buy £50 worth of my debt? Okay, so you'll give me £50 of that debt, and what I'll do is I'll guarantee you every month I will pay the interest. So you say to me, yeah, I'll give you £50 for that debt, okay, but I want £5 every month until it's paid off. So what you do is, you know, I will give you £5 every month for that lump sum, and that's pretty much the big one. You know, the big ones are like China. China owns about 11% of US debt. It's over $1 trillion worth of debt. It's good for the US because they've had $1 trillion pumped into their economy, yeah. But it's good for China because it's like a guaranteed payment every month for, you know, pretty much forever, and it's a massive amount, you know, interest on $1 trillion, you know, every month or year, whatever deal they've got. It's that type of thing. So And there's also a lot of off-the-book, unregulated wealth creation as well. Now, I'm going to give you this one. This is not necessarily a national debt example, but it is an example of a banking system creating wealth out of nothing. And this is what sort of nations do as well. So rather than sort of just print money off to create inflation, what they'll do is, and I'll give you an example of the housing market, which is one of the biggest reasons of the financial collapse of recent times. It was unregulated mortgage loans in the US that kicked off the banking crisis. And what it is it's like Mr. Orange comes into a bank, okay, and they deregulated the housing market. So Mr. Orange, even though he might be in debt, even though he might have had failed this and failed that, we've allowed him to come into the bank and say, I'd like £100,000 loan to get a mortgage. Yeah? So they say, right, okay then. Now you promise me you're going to pay that. And then Mr. Orange says, yeah, I promise, yeah, I will give you £300 a month, yeah, and I will pay that off in, 40 years' time or whatever. Excuse me, maths. So the bank then signs the contract, and what they do is, that's called like speculative wealth. So because Mr. Orange has agreed to pay that 100,000 in a contract, I now create that 100,000. It wasn't in my vault as such. The fact that you've given me an IOU over 30, 40 years, I then go and invest it somewhere else, and they say, where's this money come from? And we say, well, Mr. Orange is going to pay it off in 40 years. So even though I've not got it now, I promise you I will have it in 30, 40 years. Can you see how that was then created? So what you do, you get for 100,000, 200,000, 300,000 people that can't actually pay off that mortgage, because if you'd have actually had regulated housing, they wouldn't have even got that in the first place. Then they are defunct on their loans, don't they? So what we've invested in has collapsed, and now they want paying. So we go back to the types of Mr. Orange, and he's defunct his loan because he can't pay his mortgage. So that illusion of wealth was created and invested, and yet there was nothing in the vaults. And it's this type of, they call it actually, this in itself is quite bizarre. You've got the banking system, then on the side, which is at least as big as the banking system is what's on your books, yeah? It's the off-book, it's called the shadow banking system. I mean, have you ever heard of a more sinister name? This is real.
Yeah.
This isn't like, it's in the shadows. This is like legally binding, every country does it. They have on the books banking system, they have a system called the shadow banking system. Now,
brilliant. Now I understand why US didn't let Germany to do the bold.
Just to put it into perspective for the shadow banking system. Gold. The US, right after the last crash, their shadow banking system was actually 2.5 times bigger than its conventional banking system. So that just shows you what's off the books. All right, guys. So when you're asking like how does it happen, it's an accumulation.
Yeah.
Of all these things that we've just mentioned, okay? The main one is the shadow banking. Yeah, the main one is all these and interest, yeah? But, I mean, when you say the main one, they're only slightly more than, it's a combination of all these things. It's totally and utterly out of control. So, putting that in perspective, guys, austerity, yeah? Just to let you know, yes, okay, we're in the UK. Now, the UK has debts that is the equivalent of 83% of its gross domestic product, okay? So we're talking about a big figure here, guys. We're talking about 1.5 trillion pounds that the UK is in debt with. Now, Mr. White, I don't know if you knew that figure before, but have you got any thoughts on that, on a figure that big?
Well, I was studying the US income per year and what that GDP is.
Who's this?
GDP is about $10 trillion.
US, okay.
That's America.
No, I think.
Right.
I think.
Well, am I wrong?
Right.
I think so. It is about 10. I think it's about 10. And then their debt is about 17 or 14.
I'll tell you what it is. They do have a debt clock, don't they? They have a debt clock in America.
Yeah, indeed, yeah. So they have like the debt is bigger than their yearly income, and that's whole GDP. This is not profit we're talking about. This is whole turnover of the money comes into the government per year, which is a huge amount. Don't forget, You don't spend money once a year. You
22
spend money every
trillion
day.
roughly now. Their
22
wealth
now.
is roughly,
Woo!
like you say, 10 or
I
11
was reading.
trillion dollars. So the US are 22 trillion,
Yeah.
in the
Exactly.
red, and they are the most powerful, richest nation of ever,
In the red.
and they make roughly 10 or 11 trillion dollars a year. So,
Yeah,
which is
indeed,
roughly
which is
100% of their
crazy.
gross domestic
Because in
profit
comparison,
product.
and if we take so that's why.
Yeah.
So if we're talking about England, though,
It's not,
82%,
but
is not that bad in
isn't it funny
comparison
how
to
the
to the
parameters get
US.
skewed, because
And it
actually
is bad.
the worst offenders in this are Japan.
Yeah.
Apparently, Japan is over 200% their gross domestic product profit. Yeah. So when you look at that, you think, oh, 83% ain't too bad.
Yeah.
But you're in the realms of madness, aren't you? When you're looking at it like that, when you're comparing like that, it's absolutely crazy, isn't it?
Indeed.
So going back to austerity, guys, when the debt is that much out of control, where do we now stand in relation to nurses, which are an essential part of our society? Not getting a 1% pay rise, Mr. White. You reckon? So 1.5 trillion in the red, and they're quibbling over 1% pay rise for nurses.
Yeah. It's like you're trying to scratch the last bit out of the empty jar, which is doesn't gonna give you. Like for example, you have a jar of honey. You ate it a long time ago, but you still like scribbling out the bits and pieces on the sides. This is nurses. This is something you should not do. This is something you should be protecting. You should use another full jar instead of trying to scribble out the small pieces out of the people, because it's not really. It's literally not going to give that major effect whatsoever. But unfortunately, it will keep the poorest people or middle class a bit poorer, rather than a stronger middle class and poorer people, starting earning something. Mr. Orange.
I was just going to say though, it's normal for a country to be in debt. So if you're going to look at it from a capitalist point of view and looking at growing the economy, surely stability and growth are more important than the actual debt, because you can figure out ways to get rid of that debt. Surely the most important thing would be to have a growing economy, and usually cutting seems to all that does is ever strangles the economy. Is the debt that important that you're not going to pay people who are doing the most important jobs in society in line with the rise in the cost of living?
So
I mean, 1% is nothing.
I understand what you're saying there. So if the debt can be
Indeed,
managed,
yeah.
I suppose it doesn't really in this system that we live. It doesn't really matter what that figure is, as long as it's managed. Yeah, is that what you're saying?
It seems a really strange concept to think of a country's, wealth as in thinking this many people are all thinking collectively about this wealth. Well, everyone's got different amounts themselves. Surely, the main thing is stability. So the only reason we have economies as a system is for stability. It's not, it's not state capitalism to make, England the greatest country in the world or anything like this. It's and if it was, I don't think it would be about whether the country's actually ambitious, because
But I do think
that would
that
just
Mr.
fall into
White
the
has
hands
got
of
a point
individuals
there,
anyway.
because it's all very well saying that it is a system. Don't worry, trust us, we can manage it. It looks out of control to you little guys, yeah. But we've got big brains looking into this with big, massive calculators, and everything's going to be okay. But when it's used to, in my opinion, it's used to browbeat us at certain points. It's either manageable or it's not manageable, yeah. And I don't think that the 1% rise for nurses is going to be the difference here. There's people that sort of suggest that, take it out. If we've got wars, endless amounts of money to have these endless amounts of wars, surely there's some give and take with budgets, defence budgets or stuff like that. There never seems to be any problem about debt or austerity when it comes to the military, let's say. But when it comes to actual working people and things that social things in society, such as the NHS, it's like, oh no, sorry that you forgot about the debt. You know what I mean? It's we can't have it both ways. It's either got to look transparently, like everybody's getting cut to ribbons, or, you know, it's not. It's just this massive, massive debt that nobody can really make a dent into. So really, it becomes about paying off the interest, doesn't it? It's not really about the debt. It's all about paying the interest. If you can, as long as your interest payments every month are getting paid, it's like Wonga, isn't it? Really, then nobody cares. You know, everything seems to be in its right equilibrium. But as soon as you default on your interest, you get things like Greece or Portugal and economies that have, you know, collapsed in the grand scheme of things. And then you get the people there, the IMF move in and they start slashing pensions and they start slashing wages by 25-30% and stuff. And then there's all these riots on the street and everything comes out into the open and then debt becomes a significant part of their society. But I can't help but thinking it's just really digits moving about on computers now. We're well past the age of, you know, the gold standard, yeah, or silver or anything else, you know. I like to say you can throw on the poker table.
Oh, yeah.
You know, we are talking about digits on computers moving around the world now. The actual wealth, the tangible wealth that you could hold in your hand and say, look, I've got a gold bar, there's some real wealth or whatever. That's over. So I find it fascinating that like countries like Greece could have the IMF moving because they defaulted on their interest payments when there's nothing tangible in any vaults anywhere other than digits moving about on computers. I mean, I don't know. What do you think, Mr. Orange?
I've always thought of it as a house of cards. Any money that has been made is sat with, you know, individuals who've made the risks, sold these, made personal wealth, made wealth for certain companies. So yeah, some of that can be reclaimed. But yeah, it's crazy that firstly that would be allowed to happen, and secondly that the response is for people who have nothing to do with even that industry,
and just to give
to be the ones who are affected by it. I mean, because business is international. It's not down to individual countries.
But again, just to put it into perspective here, when we're talking about there's more debt in the world than there is actual wealth, we're not talking about a bit different. And just to give you a figure here, it's been estimated that there's about $190 trillion worth of debt in the world, okay? But global GDP is roughly about $70 trillion. So the idea of paying off your debt at some stage hits a brick wall, doesn't it? Because there's not enough wealth to pay it off. So it's farcical, isn't it? It's absolutely farcical that the Conservatives, for me personally, can come in and say, you know, we need to get our house in order, we need to pay off these debts, yeah, so we're slashing everything. It's like, what they need to say is, we will never, in the current system, and can never, ever, ever, ever pay these debts off. But nobody's ever thinking of alternatives to this. It just seems to be this bat to always beat you with, this debt. But it's never gonna be paid off, and it physically cannot be paid off. At some stage, there's gonna have to be a total restructuring of the financial sector, you know, on a global scale, and a hell of a lot of it is gonna have to be written off, or it's gonna be a total system change. Okay, so I was going to ask you, can it be realistically paid off? But I think we might have covered that, guys. It cannot be paid off physically, spiritually, emotionally, in any way, shape or form. That will not be paid off, guys. You need to be aware of that.
Do you think it's ever been intended that, you know, it would be paid off? Don't you think? I mean, that's just a really good.
I call it digital enslavement.
A really good way
as soon as wealth
people
just became digits on screens moving around the world, and countries are literally enslaved, not to wealth, not to capital, not to anything in vaults that you can pick up, just to digits, on financial computers saying you owe us this now and it's interest rate gone like that and blah blah blah. I mean, I'm not saying it was the grand design. I don't know if you are, Mr. Orange, but it's certainly a plus. You know, if you want poor nations to be tied to rich nations and so on and so forth, and it could certainly have an impact if you want to go to a certain part of the country, or if a certain part of a
Yeah.
country's got something you want, and they are, you know, totally and utterly indebted to you in every way, shape, or form, that's going to bend a few ears,
Yeah.
isn't it? If you want stuff to, to take stuff or do stuff. So, Mr. White.
Yeah, well, basically, just I've been thinking about, the a really good point about the enslavement. I was watching a program not long time ago, a few years ago. It was in regards to the U.S. prices, internal prices. Why are they so much lower than any other country? Well, for example, UK. So you go into the shop and the same products will cost much cheaper than in here. So how can they sustain this with the biggest salaries as well? Apparently, the program went into the conclusion that all the poor countries to sustain the inflation of the US, making it the smallest inflation in the world. So basically, in simple words, more nations being given out the credit by IMF sustains the whole U.S. economics. So we're talking about whole countries, African countries, poor countries, the third world countries, second world countries. So as more that U.S. gone out on ridiculous terms, for example, I loan you £100, and not only telling you give me them back with interest, but I also command you to spend those £100 using my products, my products.
Yeah.
So basically, I'm getting like triple profit of it, which is just ridiculous. So that's how basically they sustain their economy. And now talking about the austerity, my point is austerity is to tighten your belt so you can spend less and that kind of stuff, because you go into the shop, the prices are rising, but your salary stays the same. So how can you sustain the same lifestyle? Well, apparently, or the only you can do is put austerity measures personally in yourself by spending less, go on cheaper deals and that kind of stuff, right? But it's not going to happen in the world when we feed in another country with our inflation. It's a bigger picture there, and that's why I don't like. That's my personal opinion, the listener. You must understand, I'm not a financial expert. I do have some knowledge, but this is you got in a variables.
No, I think it's very interesting, especially the part where you say not only are we lending you these loans, and these loans are fabricated because there's nothing in the vaults, they're just digits on a computer, but we've got so many IOUs from around the world that we can cover these digits.
Yeah.
And yes, as long as you buy, we're happy to loan you those goods, as long as you buy American made, or as long as you buy British made goods from us, so we get it back that way. And also, I tell you what, just as a little caveat, you can give us 25% interest on that loan as well. Thank you very much. Mr. Orange?
I mean, it can extend to aid as well. I think aid is not exactly how it seems. I think also it's tied into sort of the individuals who are, have business deals, who are high up in, politics in a country. Not necessarily that, say, America will then have the best deals, but American companies will. And American companies can then go into sort of third world areas, get the resources for cheaper, get the labor for cheap. And it's, I think sometimes it's, it's easy to look in terms of, oh, well, America do this and do that. I mean, it's a large number of people, but I think it comes down to the fact that I'd say, well, it's businesses, big businesses, which I feel kind of, well, they run the economic world regardless of the nation.
Yeah, just reminding me actually. I don't know if you've ever read a book or heard the sort of the topic regarding Naomi Klein's disaster capitalism. It's essentially what you were just saying now. You kind of went into that sort of sphere. So you can accumulate so much wealth by disasters in the world, because if America has the biggest corporations and has the biggest contracts for development, infrastructure, tools, blah blah blah, she seems to claim that as much as anything else, almost things like natural resources and whatnot, is a big issue with America coming into these areas after they've been pretty much flattened and blah blah blah, and saying, don't worry. It's almost like they've got a made to measure fit of companies and corporations that come in, give us all the contracts, give us all the things, and we will make another Japan for you, or we will make another Taiwan for you. And it's almost like a fit for all, Yeah, wherever there's a disaster, wherever there's been war, civil war, anything that the United States has been involved in, Iraq and that, it's like, right, don't worry, the corporations come in. Now, those contracts are worth billions of dollars, not only to America, but also to individuals, people that run these corporations. Some of these corporations have more, I think Walmart's got more GDP than like Denmark or something like that. Do you know what I mean? You're talking about some of these corporations are like miniature countries that go around feeding off real countries. So yeah, no, I totally get your point there. Right, this is a tricky one. Now, I'm not asking for alternative systems. I'm talking about the capitalist system. Now, can this realistically be fixed within the current capitalist system, in your opinion, Mr. White? In this system, for the world to come out of this psychotic madness and get back to balancing the books, what do you reckon?
I think I don't remember whether I offered or not, but I'm one of the persons that interested in regards to, if you remember Jack Fresco, I sent you a link one day. This person is basically talking about the what you call resource orientated economy.
I'll just stop you there, Mr. White. I'll just stop you there, because if you want, we will come back to alternative systems such as resource-based economy. But what I'm asking really is, and Mr. Orange, I don't know if you want to take the lead. Then we're talking about within this current capitalist system. Yeah, can this problem be sorted out in the system that we have right now? What needs to happen? Any ideas, guys? What do you reckon?
It needs massive reforms, and it needs. I mean, I always bring it back to the individualist thing, but I think there needs to be a cap on individual wealth.
Indeed.
Because all the wealth goes to certain individuals. I mean, it doesn't. It can be certain groups of individuals, but once it's there, people want to keep hold of that wealth. They want to pass it on to the generation. They want to keep it all there, and it that takes so much of the money out of circulation, and so much of the wealth out of the cycle.
But the thing is, I think the main point. I don't know whether you agree with me or not, guys, but it's tackle the lobbying of the huge companies that always hungry. So basically, we got the laws that aims to make the wealthy people more wealthy. The organization that makes a huge profits to be even more profitable, rather than the make some and promote some laws that actually gives a worker class, better income, benefits, stability, insurance. That I see one of the main issue is when, for example, we got one project that will give 100,000 jobs in some sector and will benefit everyone. Instead of the other law would be passed on that only one company would benefit, and
Well, so what you're saying is, guys, Mr. Orange is saying individual wealth, regards to talking billionaires, multimillionaires, it's obviously not sustainable for that kind of wealth gap. So I assume you're talking about taxing here, is that right, Mr. Orange? Taxing these, or even taking it? Just
Yeah, I mean, a moderate one would be taxing. I personally think for it to work, you'd actually have to take it, which isn't obviously it's unrealistic and
and also
today's.
the question was
But
in this current system. So you're talking about individuals capping wealth and taxing, and obviously Mr. White is talking about corporations, taxing corporations and making sure that there's real competition in the market rather than monopolies. Yeah,
indeed, and competition. And I'm talking about the lobbying, lobbying of the big corporation to get benefit for themselves rather than to the public, and that you can basically clearly see that the
I think, guys, for myself, I totally agree with Peria, but I think for myself as well, just going back to those figures that we were talking about, and this idea that there's not actually enough wealth in the world to pay off the debt, nowhere near. Whether we like it or not, if we want to get back to some kind of sanity on a financial footing, it's going to have to be billions and billions and billions, if not trillions, of debt wiped off. It's going to have to be written off. Yeah, and you got somewhere going to say enough's enough, right? We've got a whole new system now where everything needs to be backed up and all this type of stuff. But none of what you said, this taxing and whatnot, we're never ever going to clear this debt. So it's a bit like, as an example, a Wonga. Wonga's just actually written off £300 million worth of debt. So Wonga is a loan shark company essentially. Yeah. that were made legal. Short loans, really high interest rates, and now they've come to the conclusion with a big backlash from the public, and also look at what they can actually get back and whatnot. They've actually written off £300 million worth of loans, which was all fabricated on interest and whatnot. So it was all bullshit anyway, And I think there's gonna have to be a clearing of the books on a similar thing. Just before you jump in, Mr. Orange, one more thing I'd say as well. I would also get the public, if we're talking about real democracy here, I wouldn't mind a little bit of transparency in regards to what we've actually loaned out. And I think you might find that there is loans out there that if they'd have been passed to the people to vote for, those loans would not have passed. We're talking about loans to despotic countries around the world, things of unethical and moral nature, and I personally don't think that a populace should be held accountable for debt that was given that wasn't on their behalf, that they know nothing about, and is just added to the national debt. And Mr. Orange,
I was just going to say, if we're writing off all this debt,
I kind of agree with you. Yeah, is it not going to roll over again to the same problem that we had before?
Potentially. You know what? I think that's a very, very good point. More than likely, if you clear the decks, the same again will happen in another 50 years, isn't it? So the question was, can it be fixed within the current capitalist system? And the answer is yes, but I think you've both just done a really good point there. All you'll be doing is pressing the reset button and starting the whole charade again. So realistically, is that viable then? If we're just giving them, giving these people a second chance or a third chance to see what they can do, is it not time to think about alternative systems now? I know I stopped you before, Mr. White, but if you want to just tell us about that idea that you had there that sounded quite interesting.
Yeah, the idea is to change the whole system from start to finish. I'm not talking about the communism. I'm not talking about capitalism. Capitalism must be essentially be write off, and the money as a currency should be discarded whatsoever. And basically, my point is the system totally needs to be changed, like swapped with a better system. One of the proposals of the system I heard of is called resource-orientated economy. What that means is the people decide on the project. Blaming someone for you not receiving your salary, but actually be part of it. And obviously, the resource-oriented economy means if you know the fact, guys, and I don't know whether you heard it or not, but we passed the point far back in in 20th century where we can produce enough food and enough living to give every single person on the earth a standard of living as a medieval king. So our technologies allows us to provide each one of us with food, equipment, houses, whatever you need, and more. And that point has been passed now way long in 1950s and everything. Our production still, because we manage and we can manage and produce resources enough to sustain billions and billions of people on this planet without no problem. But the problem is because this resources used in for example in their own country benefit, in their own corporation, in their own company, in their own house benefit, rather than the orientating the resources into the right route and developing the right ways of sectors of economy and everything, rather than just feed the pocket of already fat capitalism where the poorest are paying for the richest. Do you want to get an idea at least, shelfly?
So I think what you're saying is, yeah, so a resource-based economy is where we tally up all the resources in the world, and realistically, we dish them out in regards
and claim
to
them as a
wants and
humans
needs,
rather than
and
countries. Yeah.
and a more of a global one global system,
Yeah.
based on resource economy. Mr. Orange.
Sounds like global socialism.
Yeah. Well, I think
It does.
the thing is about socialism. You know, it is in many ways it is the antidote, or if you want to, you know, depending on which way you view things, of capitalism. There's not much else really. There's within socialism. Let's say socialism is the umbrella. Yeah, the umbrella of multiples of ideas. You know, you can even throw anarchism in there. You know, these are just social ideas as opposed to individual consumerist ideas. So I don't think it's any sort of slight to say something is an alternative way to capitalism is socialism, and that's like flogging a dead horse. Within that idea of socialism, there is multiple upon multiple of ideas about the economies. And then Mr. White there's brought one up there. Who's the guy is that Jack Fresco?
Jack Fresco,
Jack
yeah.
Fresco, yeah. So, guys, if you want to look that up, the listeners, is it Project Venus, Mr. White? Is that the deal?
Project Venus, that's the one.
So, you know, this is a viable and well thought out alternative to the system that we have now. I mean, Mr. Orange, if we don't want to sort of make it into an ideological debate, actually, Mr. Orange has just left us there. I'll tell you what, I'll just go next there. Yeah, so for me, realistically, only two things can happen. Really, even if we do change the system, I'm not gonna say what that is because that's for another debate, hopefully. But can it go on? Really, I mean, you know, we either change it or it collapses on itself. Now, we've just had a banking crisis. I think within Europe, Greece was probably the worst. So we're talking about, you know, riots in the street, and I'm talking serious riots, Molotov cocktail style riots, in a nation that is regarded as the hub of democracy. So we're not talking about, you know, traditionally sort of a nation that's just new and it's, you know, not very sophisticated in its thinking. You're talking about the country of Plato and Aristotle here. Do you know what I mean? If they can be throwing Molotovs at each other after a collapse, who's to say anyone else is not susceptible to that kind of problem? Now, I'm going to give you a funny story. It's funny in a way, yeah, but also if you actually think about and absorb what it's actually saying, it's not too funny. But there was a guy in America, I think it was in the 1980s. He decided to let the American people know just how much debt they were in, so he built what was known as the debt clock. Yeah, and the government are sort of entitled to update this as and when there's more and more debt. Now, it actually, let me just, I'll just find out where that is. One moment. I can't actually find it, but basically, it broke because there was too much debt. Now, they had to actually redo the clock in order for it to go up higher and higher, and I think it broke on about $1 trillion. I think it couldn't go past $1 trillion. So they had to literally redevelop the clock. So now it's up to now it can take up to $1 quadrillion. Now that is somebody in the 1980s saying, "This is ridiculous. We're in so much debt here. I think that people have a right to know just how much debt it is. And once they see how much debt there is, you know, certainly things will change." Now I just find it you know, hysterical that once that clock was up, it continued to rise so much that it went past the capacity for what the clock was able to actually give an output for. So if that's not a metaphor for, you know, the system will not change, you know, I don't know what is. That's if America is 22 trillion in debt, and that's the richest nation that's ever existed on this planet, then there's something in my mind, there's something intrinsically broken with that system. Now, yes, we can write off the debt, we can start again, but it's only going to continue in this cycle. So for me, you have to ask yourself, is this a cycle that you actually want to keep hold of? You know, is this a system you want to keep hold of? And that's a personal question for you. But for me, it's either you change it or you write off the debt and you start the clock again. For me personally, I'm after a change. But what I would say is, going back right to the beginning of the show, and we're talking about the nurses and the 1% pay rise. For me, because I would like change, a completely different change, I think the ideas of fighting for the nurses and fighting for these public sector workers and whatnot, what it does is it entrenches a certain value system, even if you win that fight or not, yeah? The fact that you're fighting and the fact that you sort of categorising what is important within society, I think personally will only help if there is an actual system change, because if enough people get together and say that was important, I like that aspect of our society, I like that aspect of our society, and I didn't like that aspect of our society, it'll make things a lot more clearer if there ever is any change. Now, for me personally, it's not part of the show, but regards to the environment and whatnot, capitalism on the environment, to me, I reckon within 50 years there's going to be some kind of change. There has to be, not from an economic standpoint, not because debt or anything like that, but simply because the system is ravaging the planet. So if we take that just as a caveat to the show, it's not not part of the show, but if there is a potential change in 50 years, within 50 years, this idea of debt will be eradicated, but there is a chance that it could collapse on itself. So there's the two, for me personally, there's the two most realistic things that could happen. Either the debt will eventually collapse in on itself and you will have the mother of all catastrophes, or there will be a complete conscious change in society based on the planet dying before our eyes. So, Mr. Orange, you broke up before. We're just talking about. I mean, Mr. White actually did bring up, like you say, it was global socialism and all that. It's entirely up to you where you want to take this. I was just more talking about the more realistic aspects of where the change might occur. But based on the podcast and talking about how big the debt is and austerity, what the people are fighting for and all that, what do you think is the conclusion sort of for the future? You think it's going to be a change in society, a change in the financial sector, a collapse? What's you? I'm only talking about your gut feelings. We know none of us are financial advisors, none of us are, whatnot. But
Sure,
Mr. Orange,
you'd have to have some faith that things would change. I'm a socialist as well, so I'm not exactly gonna be happy with just reforms on a current system, which I don't see particularly working anyway. Short term, I think in a way we've got used to that, and I think it's kind of it's only when the population is told, that it's got that bad, that they'll react. I think people will look outside the window and see what's going on and look at in their own situation and see what's going on. I don't think, as you said, these countries, they've been in debt for so long anyway, that it is just
become
like
normalised, isn't it?
yeah, it's like having a student loan. You don't really worry about it. It's like you just think, well, I'm never going to pay that back.
I think you're right. I think psychologically, they're within a very narrow paradigm, and they can't see outside of that paradigm. They can't actually see within it.
Yeah.
So they're exactly what you said, just like a student loan. When you're in the middle of it, and everybody works this way, it becomes normalised. Something like listen, 1.5 trillion pounds worth of debt becomes normal.
Yeah, it's horrible.
And I think the people in government who are dealing with this, they're all millionaires, so they've got nothing. They've not really got an investment in it if it goes wrong anyway. It's basically, well, we'll try our best. We'll put the wool over a few people's eyes, and what's the worst that can happen? I get fired. Well, big deal. I'm going to go off to live in my mansion, or if this country goes totally to shit and there's riots, then I'll just move abroad. I think the thing of the idea of national debt is kind of alien for most people to consider, because it's that many people, and it's not it's not your personal wealth, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
But getting back to my
Does,
point,
yeah,
what I
it
think
does.
will happen, I think the economy will pick up again, and then it'll crash again. I don't know, 15, 20 years down the line. and then face the same problems again. Maybe more so. Maybe things maybe more out of hand. But like I said, I'd hope that there'd be enough of a movement that forms somehow globally to bring about a change. But to be honest,
Yeah.
I've no there's nothing that says to me that that's going to happen anytime soon.
No. And plus as well, I think. Sorry, Mr. Whitebomb.
A major event, for example, needs to happen, right, to twist the minds of the people to thinking that this is had to stop. The way we were working previously should be changed. Something big like a war, a catastrophe. It's I'm not I'm not saying it should happen. I'm saying we are Homo sapiens, the people. We have skill to think, and it should be avoided rather than burning. Just started thinking once we already burned ourselves on something. And I'm talking about the environment, which is a big question, right? This we draining our planet, and then something gonna happen big. Only then, when it might be already too late, we start to think that we need to change. So hopefully we are smart enough to think of change before it happens.
Yeah. I mean, for me personally, again, I think I am a student of history, and it would be. I'm not saying we're not capable, because we are more than capable, but looking at history, it seems to me that those in power, even faced with, environmental Armageddon, would not relinquish that power. So it's either going to be, in my opinion, it's either going to be a standoff, um, or an out and out change. I think a crash coupled with an environmental, sort of the tipping point of climate change, something like that might bring it on, unfortunately. I would love to think that we would be rational enough and educated enough and work out ways to remove the problems, the people, the corporations and whatnot, in a timely manner. But my gut feeling is, and I hope I'm wrong, is that there's going to be a standoff within 50 years, and the outcome of that is unclear. I would love to think that, like you said, Mr. Orange, that we do progress spiritually, intellectually, and as humanists every couple of 100 years. But there are on occasions where we have gone backwards, and it's about it's basically it's numbers versus power. That's what it'll be about. Yeah, that we'll have the numbers, okay, but they've got all the power and they've got all the equipment. It's very difficult to separate economic, subjects. We are all connected, and there are consequences on a global level, that veer off to the actual individual. The nurses 1% pay rise. So I hope we haven't finished on a melancholy kind of tone. There is, change doesn't necessarily mean, oh no, here we go again. It can be an exciting thing. It's about developing yourself. It's about understanding different situations, different economies, different ideas, and being a part of this difference. So when things do happen, or seem to happen, it's about getting on board and not being afraid of change. But that's where we are. We're a world in debt. Okay, we're all debtors, and it's up to. Personally, I think it'd be up to us to think of something new rather than for the old guard to change. It'd probably be a first in history if the old guard were to actually change, turn around and create a new system for us. However, that's for another show. So I'd like to thank Mr. Orange and Mr. White.
Thank you.
I will.
Thanks a lot.
I will see you both next week. And if anyone's got any questions, any comments, if you think we've got this totally wrong, if you think we've got our figures wrong, our ideas are totally, wrong, please, questions, comments. We're on Facebook, we're on Twitter. Yeah, please, we welcome anything, insults, whatever you've got, send it our way. We're three normal guys that like to talk about politics on a weekly basis, and we'd love more and more people to join in the debates. Okay, guys, we'll see you next week. Bye bye.